Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. This is a special roundtable discussion for the Pro-Manchester Race, Ethnicity and Religious Belief Committee. I'm delighted to introduce and welcome our host for today's session, Dr. Amna Khan, Senior Lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University Business School. So without further ado, I will hand over to Amna.
Thank you very much. So today's roundtable is about race, ethnicity and religion, and it's come at a great time. Muslims around the world have just celebrated Eid after 30 days of fasting. So it's in keeping with what the steering group's about. Today we're going to look at issues to do with race and ethnicity within the workplace. So I'd like to welcome my esteemed panel, and I'd like to start by asking you to introduce yourself. Harvey, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Amna. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harvey Reid. I am the head of Premier Events at Barclays Bank. I'm also a master's student at Manchester Met as well.
Brownie points for that. Fatima.
Thanks, Amna. So Dr. Fatima Tresh, I'm a business psychologist and consultant with Delta Alpha Psi, a niche leadership and inclusion consultancy.
And Joanne.
Hi, thanks. I'm Joanne Conway and I'm a D&I lead for EY, and also I do some part-time lecturing with Telford University.
So thank you very much for that. I'd like to start by warming the discussion up by just asking you about things that work well within your organisations to improve racial equality and especially opportunities for wider representation, whether that be at junior level or more senior level. If you'd like to talk to that, who would like to start?
I'm happy to go first.
Okay.
So what I forgot in my introduction was that I'm also one of the co-chairs of our Black Professional Forum, which represents our Black colleagues across the UK. I think one of the things, to answer to your question, that's working well is that Barclays has an Embrace network which actually covers ethnicity and also covers race, and this allows colleagues to have the opportunity to speak, to share their views and their viewpoints. And looking at this from a race point of view, especially what happened last year around this time surrounding George Floyd, the Black Professional Forum, which I co-head, we were able to speak directly to our senior leaders, which prompted our CEO to launch a statement in support of Black colleagues, but also to give more representation in terms of what we can do better as a company to help Black colleagues to understand the needs of our Black colleagues as well. So it's a really good platform, and like other ethnicities and also from a religious point of view as well, all the groups have that opportunity to speak up and put their points across and their viewpoints to help with awareness and understanding.
Okay. And if I could just pick up on that point, Harvey, I think that whole piece around that, creating that safe space and making sure that people have a platform is hugely important. And one of the things at EY that we found is really around the balance when we're looking at, particularly around improving racial equality, is having that differential investment, so recognising that everybody isn't at a level playing field. So we have things like differential investment programmes, which are Future Leaders programme, which creates that organisational change and allyships and really focusing on diversifying our top talent. But at the same time, we also look at all of our talent processes, because we recognise that this isn't about fixing our minority groups. Actually, this is really about how do we look at this systemic change, how do we look at our processes to make sure that they're set up in a way that is going to benefit everybody equally. So for us, it's really about kind of having that two-pronged approach of really understanding how we can make sure that we create those equitable experiences and opportunities, but at the same time we're really working on that longer term systemic and behavioural change, which I know from conversations we've had before, Fatima, that's definitely an area that you've been helping EY with as well as other organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
More about that, Fatima.
Yeah, thanks, Amna. Thanks, Joanne. I think great points made already. I think particularly in terms of the importance of a safe space. I think organisations, fortunately, more and more recognising that it's not the responsibility of the minority professionals to fix race and ethnicity in terms of inclusion and representation. And so we're seeing more and more organisations getting on board with wanting to educate their senior leaders in terms of what difference they can make in terms of making change happen, whether that be advocating with an authentic voice on this or sponsoring across difference. So the safe space we found is really important for those leaders in the majority to be able to unpack what some of their concerns are with talking about race, for example, unpack why it's more challenging to sponsor across difference and how they can do that authentically in a way that's effective as well. So we found that a psychologically safe space for minority ethnic professionals is really important to unpack shared lived experience. But I think a safe space for majority leaders as well to unpack their fears and concerns to help them move forward in terms of making the change that we need to see. So I think that's been having quite an impact, I would say.
I think that's really useful to know as somebody who works in academia, the importance of a safe space, especially for younger graduates from ethnic minorities. In MMU, we have a huge population of ethnic minority students looking for graduate positions, and it's nice to know that large organisations are making those steps. I wonder, for smaller, local, more organisations, what advice would you give if they wanted to implement these processes? Is that a question nobody wants to answer?
I thought Fatima was going to take that one.
Yeah, same.
Okay, happy
You all
to
just
jump
went
in.
quiet, and I thought, oh,
yeah,
maybe
we're happy to, but yeah, we'll take the lead.
Sure. So in terms of one of the things I deliver a lot of sessions on is what we call race fluency. So getting comfortable talking about race. But I find many organisations come to us and say, can you give me a list of the words I can and can't use when it comes to talking about race? And I say, that's not what race fluency is about. Race fluency is about understanding other people's lived experience and being able to create the space to unpack that and for people to share their thoughts and experiences. So if we think about smaller organisations, yes, you may not have the critical mass, but you can still create that psychologically safe space. You can be an enlightened leader, you can be an inclusive leader, and you can give people the space to unpack their experiences and share what some of their concerns are and some of their lived experiences as well. So it's possible to create that safe space in smaller organisations, and whether you're in the majority or minority as well.
That's really cool. So how would you measure racial diversity and opportunity in the workplace? Should we start with Joanne? Yeah,
so in terms of measurements, I guess at EY, because it is such a large organisation, we are lucky that we've got a sophisticated suite of metrics, and obviously we're analytical by nature as well. So one of the things that we found is really about, going back to the point I made earlier, is we've absolutely got to measure and track our progress and identify any gaps so that we know what we need to address. But we also need to understand about this whole culture piece as well. We can't just focus on the numbers, we've got to do both. And I think for some organisations, and certainly for us, we're still grappling with that and making sure that we can. But things that are, obviously representations, we'll measure from a race and ethnicity perspective, the representation of our people. But also what we found really helpful is measuring our work allocation. So we know that in professional services, that the type of work that you get, the type of clients that you have, the networks and the exposure that you get, is really dependent on your career succession. It can really influence your career trajectory. So we look at how our work is allocated, and we can do that through a gender and ethnicity lens, and where we have identified that there are any gaps or where there are any disparities on that we work to understand that. So we close those gaps by working with the leaders. We'll work with their teams to understand, why is that? Why is the makeup of my team not diverse? What can I do to make sure that I do that? Recognizing that it's going to bring benefits for the individual, but also for our clients as well. We're going to solve our problems much quicker and be able to innovate in a way that we just wouldn't be able to with a homogeneous team. So I think definitely work allocation is key, and also all of the things around pay, promotion, reward, breaking that down even beyond ethnicity, which is one of the things that we committed to as part of our anti-racism commitments, is that we don't look at it as a BAME as a grouping. We look at it, what is the experience, what are the outcomes for our Black colleagues, for our Asian colleagues, for our Chinese, for our mixed, because there are differences, and we've absolutely found that has given us more data, more rich data, and being able to really respect those communities and make changes that we wouldn't have been able to do without that data.
I think you've got a great point there when you raise the issue of BAME and how that acronym encapsulates so many different cultures, and you actually lose the essence and nuances of cultures and how important they are to the individuals, but also to understand their lived narratives and their shared experience. For example, I'm British Pakistani, and somebody else might be British Indian, and our experiences, although they look very similar from the outset, they could be very different, and they could come from a different religion. Harvey, I wonder, is the focus as data driven in your organisation?
So data plays a really important role to understand where we are and what needs to be done. I think from Barclays' point of view, we've just appointed a Chief Diversity Officer, and his role is going to be looking at diversity in its entirety, not just looking at race, but looking at gender and all the other categories that fall under that. So I think going forward, firstly, it's a positive step because it's never happened in its history before. So it clearly shows that firstly there was a need. And again, it really speaks to like colleagues speaking out and actually voicing their concerns, and actually is there true representation. I think that was just mentioned earlier. So I think this is a really positive step for Barclays and a positive step for our colleagues as well. And I'm really confident that with this appointment, there will be some, we'll be able to learn from the things that haven't happened in the past, and actually that will shape what's going to go ahead in the future. And I think it's going to be all underpinned by data, because data will tell us what's going on. But I think the culture is so important. So, data can tell you one thing, you have all that, but if the culture doesn't change, then what's the point? So I'm really optimistic.
So Fatima, would you like to add to that?
Yes, sure. Happy to jump in. Lots of things coming up in terms of the role that data plays. Just reflecting on this, I think there's so many ways in which we can collect and collate that data to tell the story. I think it's really important that when we look at the data and we overlay that not just with the what, so not just what are some of the disparities playing out, so in performance ratings, in promotion progression, things like that, but also the why. So the survey or kind of organizational level data can give us a picture of what's happening, what's playing out, and what are some of the key differences. But that lived experience piece, that speaking to individuals, creating those safe spaces to have conversations about this, understanding the lived experience, but also the mindsets of the decision makers as well, can help us to understand the why behind the what. So why are these differences playing out? How is this happening? And that can help us to build evidence-based recommendations for what needs to change. Just reflecting on some of the things that happened over the past year, and organisations are paying much more attention to their data. So for example, working with a number of organisations who have acknowledged or recognised what we call race performance gap. So those in the minority being rated as underperforming relative to their white counterparts. Seeing that data but not understanding where that's coming from. Now we know it's not coming from a difference in objective performance. So what's driving that? And it's been helpful for us to work with clients to unpack what that means. Is it bias in the decision-making process? Is it the way that people give feedback? Is it the context triggering things like stereotype threat? So it's really important to not just understand the what in terms of what's different, but also the why that's happening as well. And that can paint a picture of, how do we make change happen in a way that's has an impact and is sustainable.
I think you really allude to something interesting there about the what and the why. And it's interesting what you say, because within higher education, we're noticing an awarding gap difference between students who are of British white ethnicity and students of ethnic minority. And that awarding gap is nothing to do with the students' academic abilities, because if they came in on the same grades, let's just say 3 A's for a BAME, not a BAME student, but an ethnic minority student, or a 3 A's for a white student, over the course and duration of their education, their graduate outcome will be very, very different. based on the fact that they're awarding. So for example, the British white student might get a first and the ethnic minority student might get a 2-2. That then has implications on their graduate outcomes, such as where they get placed to do their first graduate job, etc. And it's interesting because at the moment we know that it's happening and there is some evidence to show why it's happening, but we're really having to take a step up in this and trying to understand how we can put in measures to change things that we know from the data, but putting that what and that why together to actually see some outcomes that will benefit the students. So what I'm listening to and what I'm gauging from what you're saying, we're trying to equip the millennial professionals, especially from ethnic minorities, who will shape the future of business and cultural practices of the next 20 years. So what things are you doing and what ways are you going to do that?
To kick this one off. So over the last 12 months, we've started in Barclays a lot of listening groups, listening rooms, which is an opportunity for colleagues just to talk about their shared experience or lived experiences. And it gives leadership the opportunity to hear what's happening across different departments. Some departments have different makeups in terms of different backgrounds of colleagues. And I think sometimes it's been a really interesting experience because some managers, some leaders haven't taken the time, but they've been able to listen to what's really happening. And it's almost a reflection of what's happening in society, because once you come through the doors at work, everything doesn't stop. You still, life still goes on. And I think it's actually your experience of getting from your house to work, and you can have multiple experiences. Which no one would ever, care to think about. And I think it's when you come through those doors at work, you're just in the work mode, but you may have gone through several things just, in that space of an hour and a half, just to get to work. It's actually, how do you carry on with that? How do you move forward? And a really good example of this is like one of my colleagues was stopped by the police because they believed that they thought that they had drugs on them, and he was again in his suit walking to work in the train station, and this was something that happened to him just coming out of hundreds of people, and these are some of the things which we know happen or may not happen. And I think these are some of the examples that happen when you come to work, and then actually you have to put that behind you and then concentrate on your day job. And I think sometimes, how do you separate those things? So I think for these listening groups have been really important for individuals just to understand what's happening. And I'm not just that's one instance. There's many more I could can share. But I think the listening groups have really helped to put things into perspective. And that actually, everyone has been treated as a human being, but everyone's circumstances is unique. So that's really helped. And as I said, before that, we've now appointed a chief diversity officer. We've had so many things come off the back of that. So I think that's really helped from a Barclays perspective, and it's really helping our colleagues find their voice.
And just to add to that, Harvey, I think it's so important, and you're so right about that really listening to people's lived experience and recognizing that, we don't just show up to work and, we're all of the things that we are, everything that kind of we've had an experience on the way to work. And part of the journey that we've been going on with our leaders and our people is really about recognizing that your experience isn't the only experience, and recognizing that actually, because this hasn't happened to you, and it doesn't mean it doesn't happen to everybody else. And part of the work we've been really doing is exploring privilege and working with our leaders and our people, and particularly our white colleagues, to understand what our own privilege is as being a white individual, and how we really need to take that ownership of recognizing how that plays out, not just in society, but actually when we walk in the doors to work, whether that's virtual or physical. So that's really important. And in terms of the generational piece, as well as having the listening to the voices, which we've been doing at EY as well, really valuing those listening sessions that you mentioned, Harvey, and then taking that through to, so what are they actually saying? What do they want differently? So taking that real designed thinking approach of not assuming what everybody wants. And that's definitely something that we've taken with the whole coming back to work, and helping you get the differences of not just from a race and gender and, all of our diversity, including generations. So what is it that our younger people want? And we tap into things like our apprenticeship, our apprentices coming in, our EY Foundation as well, who've got some fantastic, incredible talent, and we need to listen, but we also need to take action. We need to listen to what they've got to say and then act on that as well. And I think that's really important. If people share their experiences and share what their opinions, and they don't see acted on, then that's where you're going to see that disenfranchise and that, you know, real lack of engagement and a missed opportunity for the organisation.
Yeah. Fatima, for organisations that might be new to this, how would you suggest implementing structures like this?
Thanks, Amna. Yeah, great question. I think the more research that we've conducted with organisations, the more we're encouraging organisations to shed light not just on the experience of minority ethnic professionals, but for those in the majority as well. And I think when we're talking about race and racism, one of the things we often overlook is we concentrate on the fact that those in the minority are more likely to have a negative or a disadvantaged experience. What we often overlook or fail to consider is the fact that those in the majority have an advantaged or a privileged experience as well, and that's what creates a disparity in experiences and outcomes. So to encourage organisations looking to make change happen and implement some of these, it's to not just look at what we're not doing right for some groups, but actually what we're doing for other groups that's giving them that advantage or that privileged experience. And then when we can identify those practices and processes that are advantaging some in the majority, how can we roll those out to those in the minority as well? So in terms of just findings that are coming up time and time again with different organisations, we see that those in the majority have access to what we call career capital, the things that you need in order to succeed in your careers. And so career capital is really about understanding the unwritten rules of the game. And I think this comes up time and time again when we talk about millennials, particularly minority ethnic millennials, joining the workforce. It's that assumption that, you know, my parents told me, put your head down, work hard, and you'll make it. But when you get into an organization, you realize that organizations are machines. We're not objective. We're very subjective. We're relationship based. And it takes understanding the unwritten rules of the game, navigating the political environment, and that not having that insight just by virtue of being in the minority can put those in the minority at a disadvantage. So in terms of leveling the playing field, it's about how do we equip those minority ethnic professionals with that career capital? How do we provide the mentorship and sponsorship opportunities that those in the majority might get more readily just by virtue of having affinity with people, with leaders or managers who look more like them? And so that's just some recommendations in terms of thinking through, you know, how do we start this? How do we shed light on this, and where do we start?
I think you've raised some great points that the panel has, you know, in its entirety. Some of the issues that we're grappling with at the moment is trying to encourage the, you know, students from ethnic minority backgrounds to look for role models, and we're trying to do schemes where mentors come in and mentor them for these skills that they might not have, or, you know, this mindset that they have, if I just work hard, I'll make it, but there's more to it than that. And we're really trying to get them to understand the importance of relationships and networks, and building those networks to create your own capital of networks that you know that you can then use. So I'm going to move on to the concept of religion and religious beliefs. I mentioned that we just celebrated Eid after a lovely month of Ramadan. So I know in my organisations we'll be giving out little iftars. If you come to the office, you've been offered some dates and water, just a little bit of something, a bit of sandwiches to open your fast, even though they open at 9 o'clock, and, you know, we're hanging on with every little bit of whatever we've got at that time. So how do you in your organisations, you know, allow religious observations? How does it impact work? And how is it embraced to create a culture where religious beliefs of colleagues and faiths are, you know, inclusive?
Yeah, happy to kick off from EY perspective. We're like so proud of our networks. We have 6 networks and 31 communities. So we did have 26 networks 2 years ago, and we refreshed that approach to really to kind of encourage that intersectionality. And what we've done now by having kind of this 6 networks with all of the communities underneath them is it's really encouraged them to work together more collaboratively within their networks and also across the board as well. So we see like with our Unity network, which is for our LGBT plus network, they have been doing things with our Embrace network, which is our religious and belief network, and even as part of the Embrace network, they came together to stand against solidarity around hate crimes. So, you know, our Hindu network, our Sikh network, all coming together to really encourage this sense of belonging within networks and across. And then just in terms of some of the structure, obviously it's all changed now, but we would have our prayer rooms, we would have inclusive bathrooms, you know, to respect people from different communities and what they may need. And really just listening to our communities and networks, like Harvey mentioned that as well, like really just listening to what it is that they need, not making assumptions, and then making sure that you are respectful to what that is. I think working flexibly really helps. So we all work flexibly. So depending on what you need, if you need to take time for prayer, or if you need to go and do something, that you can actually do that and work in a way that's going to be respectful for yourself. And then one of the things that I've personally been involved with and really enjoyed is with our Muslim network. Every year they do a fasting challenge, so they encourage everybody from, you know, outside of the Muslim faith to join them for a day, and they buddy you up and you get to kind of learn more about the faith. And personally, as a practicing Catholic, when I've done it, I've learned that we've got quite a lot of things in common actually from a Catholic and a Muslim perspective. And obviously we have Lent, which isn't as strict as fasting, but it's a really good way to kind of come together and actually just celebrate and learn from each other. That, you know, we've all got these things in common as well, and just an opportunity to build relationships with people that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily. So that's kind of what we do.
I think that's a great way. I'm actually going to take that one away.
Yeah, I do.
Implement it. I'd love somebody to buddy up with me and do my fast while I'm doing them. You just need a bit more of that, you know, community spirit.
Yeah.
Harvey, would you like to add something to that?
So it's really interesting because through our networks, we've been able to share information. So I think sometimes it's hard when you with a lack of representation. So when you don't see someone that looks like you or probably shares your belief in senior positions, it's probably something that's harder to be yourself. But what we've seen over the last, I would say, our last 12 months is more senior leaders being more open and actually providing a space for colleagues to share. So in regards to Ramadan and, you know, colleagues that are celebrating just Eid, we had our colleagues produce, it's almost like a newsletter of like, what does this actually mean? And it's more about the why. Not what it is, but why they do it, but and actually inviting colleagues to get more involved and just to open up their understanding. And again, it's more about that vulnerability. So how do you lean into your vulnerabilities? If you don't know about something, you probably shy away from it. But what we're encouraging everyone to do is to be more open and to lead into that, so that, you know, you learn. And I think for Barclays, we've got one of our values is around respect. And it's actually the first one. And I think if you've got respect for others and other cultures or other viewpoints, I think that opens up really the conversation to anything. So I think that's really a really good thing that we're seeing in Barclays, and more colleagues are seeing that across the country. So it's not just in one area; it's across the whole country.
Fatima, anything that you'd like to add with regards to religious beliefs and how organisations could make it more inclusive by incorporating them?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what both Joanne and Harvey were saying about what EY and Barclays are doing for that religious inclusivity. I think fundamentally, when it comes to difference, whether that's racial, religious, we have what we call a trust deficit, right? So we have difference in lived experience, and we therefore don't trust. We hide parts of ourselves to feel more comfortable at work. And I think fundamentally, to drive religious inclusivity, it's about you know, bridging that gap in trust. And I think underlying that is empathy. And Harvey talking about, you know, the role of senior leaders, just understanding the lived experience. I think empathy plays a fundamental role. And I liked what Joanne was saying about that buddy system. So not just doing the fast, but actually learning about it as well. And we know from contact theory, just one positive exchange with someone from a different group can reduce our prejudice and reduce our biases as well. So I think opportunities to have one-to-one conversations and realize that actually we're much more similar than we think we are, that Ramadan probably makes more sense than we originally might have thought it did, and things like that. Just having these conversations and raising our awareness, I think, can increase our empathy and increase our trust, so that people can say, you know, Eid's coming up, can I take a couple of days off for that, rather than, you know, maybe I should pull a sickie that day just to get the day off or something like that. Just being more comfortable being honest about our differences and experiences.
I think that's a really good point about Eid and how Ramadan is, as personally, as somebody who's done Ramadan and worked through it, I actually find it quite difficult, and I'm not shying away from saying that. But I like the fact that this year my manager actually reached out to me and said, we understand that it's quite difficult for you to fast and actually do your normal working pattern. So if you want some flexi time, or if you want to take your annual leave, just reach out to us and we're happy to accommodate. And just those little gestures can make a massive difference in how you feel, because you feel as though somebody understands and appreciates what you're going through. So we're coming quite close to a close on this now. So we're going to have a quick fire round. So what I'm going to ask you now is, if there was one thing, guaranteed change you could make in the next 3 years to your business to make it truly diverse and significantly improve diversity and equality in the workplace, what would it be? And I'm going to start with Harvey.
I knew you were going to come to me. So what would I want? I just want the actions to be louder than the words and more transparent, so that we won't have to be coming into talking about what more do we want to do, what more do we want to see. I just want that when companies or society, I don't want to say companies, I just want to say society says we're going to do this, we do it. And that everyone can really feel and experience that change, because you know, there's so many blockers, but I just think, you know, just commit to the action. Diversity and inclusion, it's all about action. It's not a nice to do, it's just something that should be done. So that's what I love to see. I don't want to be a co-chair of a forum, because I don't think, you know, that will be probably be my goal, that we don't have forums or these different types of committees or networks, because we've actually taken the action and it's been done. Because that's the whole reason these networks and forums are being created, because the action's not being taken. So I like to see that eradicated, so that we can just live and you know, just smile and, you know, do what's right. So yeah, I'll give someone else an opportunity to give an answer.
Joanne?
Oh, thank you. How can I follow that? What a great it's so true. You know, if we can just, we talked before about you know, if we want equality in work, we're going to have equality at home and in society as well. That's where it comes from. We've got to have that whole piece. So I think Harvey's point is so true to that. In honesty, you know, I did think long and hard about this, and there is no silver bullet. I wish there was, but you know, there isn't. I think if the thing that probably comes closest to that is leadership, and that's where I would like to see the biggest change, because ultimately our leaders are the ones that understand the process. They sit in that power. They understand kind of how the organisation works, and without that leadership and that genuine commitment, then change is much harder and progress is much slower.
Just following on from what Joanne said about the role of leadership, and I think that, you know, the research shows that sponsorship works, but we know that sponsorship isn't equitably distributed across race. So we know that white professionals are more likely to benefit from sponsorship than those in the minority. And so I'd like to see sponsorship equitably distributed. I think that will have a huge impact. But I think this sponsorship needs to be authentic. So understanding the difference in lived experience, having empathy across difference, and understanding that what might have worked for a senior white male sponsor won't necessarily work for a high potential Black female in the same organisation, for example. So understanding difference in lived experience and sponsoring in light of that. And just to close my point around, you know, there isn't a skills gap or a skills deficit. It's really about the culture and the environment that we're creating that enables diverse talent to thrive. So just my parting thoughts on that.
I just want to thank you for all the interesting points that you've raised today, whether that's about mentorships, whether about listening, a safe environment. There's so many things that we can do to create inclusive environments for race, religion, ethnicity, and there's so much more work we can do, but we do aspire, like you said, Harvey, to have a situation where we don't need a steering group. We don't need to, this shouldn't really even be a discussion, it should just happen by default. And I think we're moving, and slowly we'll make those steps. And yes, there is no silver bullet, as you mentioned, Joanne, but we're getting there. And I think this is a step in the first step in the right direction. And there's much more work to be done, but at least the work has been done and it's been acknowledged. So just as a final remark, if there was one thing that you would encourage the organisations to do as an action to make workplaces more inclusive for everyone, what would that be? And I want to kick off with Joanne.
Thank you. And I think what I would say is for you to take it personally, to really think about the individual kind of action that you can take, because as Harvey mentioned earlier on, it's all of these individual actions that will create this collective culture change. So personally, I would encourage everybody to think about, and particularly for anybody that is watching this who is white, to really think about their own privilege, to not feel defensive about that, to understand that while they can't be responsible for history, they can absolutely be responsible for the actions that they take today. So it's not about being defensive and thinking about, you know, what you have or haven't got, but really understanding and just acknowledging that we do have an advantage by being in the majority, and we need to think about how we can really level that playing field and take accountability. So just recognise your own privilege and really think about how you can be an ally to people around you, would be my advice.
That's a really insightful answer. Thank you for that. Harvey?
It's always hard when you're going second. So I think the one thing I would say is be curious, which is simply everything that Joanne said. So just be curious, because sometimes it doesn't matter whether you may have an understanding or you think you know. It's just asking questions, asking the right questions, and ask them with, and be curious with a purpose. So if that purpose is, sorry, rephrase that, be curious with a positive purpose, because I think that positive purpose will help your understanding, help the individuals. But, you know, just talking more, I think if we talk more, share more ideas, it's really going to help to demystify, unclutter any sort of, any negative notions you may have, but and really help, whether it's the company, yourself, to really progress forward. So yeah, be curious with positive purpose.
Fatima?
Thanks. I think Joanne and Harvey made some great recommendations. I guess for me, it's about thinking that we operate in ecosystems. You know, there are many of us, we all have different roles in our organizations, and we know that racism, racial bias plays out in every corner of the employment cycle, as we've talked about in this session. So whether it be performance, whether it be how someone's socialized into an organization, whether it be sponsorship opportunities, I would encourage each person to think about, where do you sit in the employment cycle, and therefore what difference can you make? So how can you make sure that your performance ratings, if you're a manager, for example, are as objective as possible? If you're a senior leader, are you sponsoring those who you may see as different to you? If you're an in-house professional, how are you making sure there's not bias in the processes and the practices in an organisation? So I think about where you sit in the employment cycle, and as a result of that, what change you might be able to make. And all of these small individual changes across the ecosystem will add up to more kind of culture transformational change.
And I think you all offered so much insight there, because if everybody just does their own little bit, understands a little bit more, takes it a bit more personal, is a bit more constructive, or just thinks about what they're doing in their everyday job and how they can facilitate this change, collectively we can create something magical, in my opinion, because I think it's small steps that make these magical things happen. It's not one revolutionary thing that's going to change. It's not going to change overnight, But if we all did our little bit, there'd be such a significant change in everybody's lived experience. And I think that would really create value for everyone. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone.